Coming up on Chasing the Natty, Week 9 of the college fantasy football season is here, and Justin and I are back to help you get prepared as always. We'll be giving you a couple of players at each of the main positions that we are starting, a couple of whom will be sitting, and then we'll finish up with some of y'all's fan-submitted start-sit questions. We've got all of that and more coming right after this.
To go, breaks a tackle, he's 10, he's touchdown! Cook's gonna throw the deep ball, and Burton past the defense! Touchdown, Luther Burton! Milrow gonna run it again, got a lane, kicked in the turbo, Milrow! Goodbye, touchdown Bama!
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. I hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Wednesday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus of Canton Podcast Network. You can find us on all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday and Wednesday morning during the season at 6 a.m. sharp. If you want to support the great work we're doing here, head on over to campuscanton.com. Subscribe there with one of our extraordinary tiers. You'll find everything you need for your CFF, Devy, C2C, betting, college DFS, all of those fun games. Plenty of great stuff, including articles, rankings, projections, tools, and even more than that. You can find me and the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty. And as always, my partner in crime with our preview and start-sit shows is Mr. Justin Leo, a.k.a. Volume Pigs, at Volume Pigs on Twitter. You can find his wonderful content over at volumepigs.com. Justin, welcome back to the show, man. How you doing?
Doing fantastic. Really enjoying coming on these shows weekly. I think we're getting into a nice rhythm here. Of course, when you're coming off a huge win, like my dogs are over Texas, you know the feeling, Jared. It's always a great week after that. So looking forward again to tonight's show.
I love the fact that we get the bye week immediately afterwards as well. So we get to kind of sit back on it for 2 weeks. It's really, really nice. And this next weekend, I get to go enjoy some apple picking. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. Which, by the way, all of you should be kind to your wives and your girlfriends or your significant others, whoever out there who want to go apple picking this time of year. Find a weekend sometime during the fall. They can't lose you for an entire season. But we will certainly try because we are absolute degenerates and we will suck up as much college football as we possibly can and get you guys prepared for another week here. A lot of great games coming up this weekend. I'm actually, I kind of posted this early on Twitter, the game I am the most excited about is easily UNLV Boise State. I think that is, in my opinion, going to be the game of the weekend. You get some awesome players in there, Ricky White, Malik Williams, obviously Ashton Jeanty, and Maddox Madsen and stuff like that. It's at 10:30 on a Friday night, so I do stuff Friday night, but I'll be able to come home, just crash on the couch, turn on that game, stay up way too late probably watching it. That's the game I'm honestly looking forward to the most this weekend. What about you, Justin? Is that the game you're looking forward to the most, or you got anybody else on your radar?
I'm sure I will be watching that game. My opponent in my home league, the Golden Pig Invitational, has Ashton Jeanty, and I don't know if I want to watch that one or not. Right? It might be a bludgeoning to my mental health, but. Speaking of being kind to our significant others, I'm taking my wife out for dinner that night. I promised her if the dogs beat Texas in the heat of the moment in the third quarter, I'd take her out for a nice dinner. And they came through. So now I have to follow through with my promise.
Good man.
But I plan to be home later that night. And I'll, maybe with some cringe on my face, I will be checking in on that game and praying, hoping that UNLV figures out how to at least slow down Jeanty. Just not 60 points, please. CFF gods, not 60.
For the good of college football in general, we need Ashton Jeanty to score 200 plus rushing yards so that his Heisman campaign continues on like that. I really don't think people realize how much I'm rooting for Jeanty to win that award. Not only because, again, I think it'll be good for college football to have, a G5 running back win that award convincingly, but also it'll be a proud moment for us CFF fans. Because I mentioned on Twitter a couple weeks ago, it's so funny listening to all of these national types like hype up GNT, talk about him and everything. And I'm sitting back here being like, dude, we've been on this guy from day one, like us in the CFF community. Like we knew coming in that he had a potential to be a star. Now, I don't think any of us were expecting him to like, challenge, Barry Jackson and stuff like that. But, it'll be a proud moment for all of us. And maybe we can get him to make a college fantasy shout out at one point.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Not only would it be a proud moment for CFFers, I think it would just be good for the game because if Genty has that type of individual success winning the Heisman, how many other recruits like him are going to end up choosing, a G5 location
Agreed.
when they have potential P5 offers, right? I'd actually really like to see this happen more as guys just sort of understand the landscape a little bit and instead of being just another body at a UGA, for example, maybe find a spot where you can be, the guy, the way Ashton Genty was, and obviously, stayed this offseason when he had offers in the transfer portal. And, you got to respect that, but also it's great for CFF. I'd love to see that happen more.
Well, it's also like, again, the counter argument to that is like, well, you go to a lower tier school, they're not going to know like really how to evaluate you because, you're facing lower tier competition. I'm like, one, these are NFL scouts. They know how to bypass these kind of things. They know what to look for. But also, too, like, I don't care who you are in the country. If you are facing constant 8-man boxes and you're still hitting 8 yards a carry, I don't care if you're playing against toddlers. That's pretty. Well, actually, maybe toddlers is a stretch. But you get my point. Like, I don't care if you're playing against high schoolers, right? Like, if you're hitting 8 yards a carry in college against 8-man boxes, that's impressive. No matter how you look at it. So
yeah, no doubt, no doubt. No, I'm right there with you pulling for him. I just hope he has a dud this week. Every other week.
No. I need Boise State to win this week so they can get to the playoff, and therefore that helps propel his Heisman campaign even more. All that great stuff. Because you know that like, if Boise State doesn't make the playoff, that'll be the key for the Heisman voters to not include him, which will be dumb as hell.
Well, I think if he ends up breaking that record, I think regardless of what happens, I think he's going to win the Heisman just because that record has been like that's such a unique sort of special thing.
I don't know, man. Like again, you look at the betting markets right now, and they have like Cameron Ward tied with him, and I'm like, don't get me wrong, Cameron Ward's been a stud this year, but like he's not really doing anything that's rewriting record books. But the odds have him the exact same as Ashton Gianti, and I'm just like, I swear to God, if these Heisman voters refuse to take a look at Gianti because he's a G5 guy and they want to give it to a Power 4 quarterback, like, what's the point of the award?
Well, I mean, if people are apprehensive about Genty playing against G5 opponents, they should take a look at Miami's schedule. I mean, I don't know who's has a stronger strength schedule, to be honest. If you're comparing the two, Genty's at least played against Oregon, had a great game in that one, right? I mean,
that's true.
Cam Ward in Miami, they might as well have a G5 schedule. I don't know the difference between most of these teams they're playing and your standard G5 team anyways. So
I think I saw the other day that like Miami's strength of schedule is like somewhere in the 40s. So like it's not horrific, but it's not.
I don't know how that algorithm is. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but so
anyway, that's enough of the GNT gushing. You guys know how much we love him around here, but let's get over into our show. But before we get there, if you guys have not already, show us some love by leaving a like, a comment, and subscribe on the YouTube side of things. If you're on the podcast side of things, make sure you leave a 5-star review wherever you are listening, and make sure you are following the show. Not only does that support us, but you are helping the entire game of college fantasy in general when you support all of the great content creators out there. We work tirelessly to bring you guys this content, so please do your special little parts. It is free to help us out with those reviews, with those likes, with those comments, all of that jazz. So appreciate you guys whenever you guys can do that. So for those of you that for some reason are just finding us at this point in the season and don't really know what kind of show we're doing here, this is our start sit shows. We basically have 3 segments. We have our starts where Justin and I will reach outside of the top 60 in the respective positions and find you guys some deeper players, maybe some guys you've had on your bench for a while, and you say like, all right, this is the week to start them. Then we go to our sits, some guys that have been doing really well for you so far this year, and we're saying like, hey, hold the brakes, probably not great to start them this week. And then we'll get to some start sit questions that you guys have sent to us through Twitter and through YouTube. So with that being said, let's get on over to it, Justin. Here in week 9, I'll go ahead and throw it over to you first, man. Who is your quarterback outside the top 60 that you are starting this week?
Yeah, well, as I say every week, this is a challenging endeavor, and I think the QB position, at least the last 2 weeks for me, has been the most difficult. I've gone to the well twice in the MAC, trying to find some value there, and twice have sort of missed the mark, I would say. I mean, it's not been pretty. This week, I am going to a P4 player, Jacoby Criswell, quarterback at UNC. The main reason is he's getting a lot of opportunities every game. You look at it, he's passed multiple times over 40 attempts. He had one game of 48 attempts against James Madison, but he's also got some rushing usage. Not consistently as much as he did this past weekend. This past weekend was his best rushing usage by far, 13 carries. He scored a couple times on the ground. Who knows? Maybe that's a trend going forward. At the very least, though, he has that sort of mobility in his game. He's usually 6, 7, 5 carries per game, getting some positive yardage. So he's not a huge dual threat guy, but he does sort of offer a little bit of extra value there at the very least. And he's had a couple of good games in CFF this year. I mean, he's hit that 30-point threshold a couple times already. And they play a Virginia team this year where, Virginia is not a great team. Franchise tells me they're, pretty middle of the road against QBs and CFF this year so far. So, I don't really know what to make of UNC's offense, but this feels like a game where they should be able to move the ball. I look at sort of those games where Criswell did well. Georgia Tech, James Madison, both those games were pretty high scoring games. His duds have kind of come against, Duke and Pitt. But even that Duke game, he still scored 20 points, which is not bad. I'll take it. In this exercise, if you look at the scores of the QBs that I've had the past couple of weeks, 20 points would be fantastic. But we're hoping to get 25 or 30. And, with the amount of opportunities that he's getting per game and the way this matchup is shaking out, who's to say he won't? So I like Criswell this week. I'm cautiously optimistic. We'll see what happens.
So I will say, 1, like the call. 2, I hope he fails. Because it very much feels like a zero-sum game between Criswell and Amari and Hampton in terms of if one has a good week in fantasy, the other one does not. And I own way too many shares of Amari and Hampton this year. So I'm hoping that he's the star of the show once again this weekend against Virginia. But this is a good matchup to pick on, right? The spread on this game is Virginia -4, over-under right about 60. So again, a decently high-scoring game expected here. Both teams expected to hit about 4 or 5 touchdowns at some point during the game here, right? Virginia's defense is something you can absolutely take advantage of here, right? Like you said, Fantrax has them middle of the road versus quarterbacks, but according to our numbers at C2C Winning Edge, they are 111th versus the pass in terms of team performance defensively. And then against the rush, they're also pretty middle of the road. They're at 79, so a little bit below average in terms of defensive team performance against the rush there. So I like the call here a lot. Again, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get the 73 yards on the ground that we got this past week. Maybe that's something that they want to play around with a little bit more. That's an anomaly.
Yeah, that was more of an anomaly.
It also could be something that they saw last week. They're like, hey, maybe we incorporate this in the game a little bit more, because it clearly was working for them a little bit last week against Georgia Tech. It wasn't until a late touchdown by Tech to kind of put the game away that they kind of ran out of gas a little bit. So I like the call here. We'll go with my quarterback here. And this feels like cheating a little bit, but he has been a huge disappointment this year, and I feel like it's fair for me to say, like, all right, now's the time to throw him out there. And that's Caden Salter, quarterback out of Liberty. He's going up against Kennesaw State this week, y'all. And good freaking Lord, I love my Owls. They're horrendous. I talked about it earlier this week on the Waiver Wire show when I talked DSTs. I think Liberty's defense is a great play this week if you have DSTs in your league. Salter has played one game in the last 3 weeks. They have gotten plenty of rest. They've had plenty of time to plan. They're coming off a bye here. They're coming up against Kennesaw State, who I think Kennesaw State is just running out of gas, right? They went up against Middle Tennessee State last week, and Middle Tennessee State's defense, according to our numbers at C2C Winning Edge, is worse than an average FCS defense. And Kennesaw State put up a whopping 3 points on them. I'm not counting the 2 points they got on the safety. They put up a whopping 3 points offensively. So Kennesaw State's basically just slowly but surely drowning here. And I think Liberty is here to make sure that they get held under here. I think this is an opportunity for Kadon Salter to have himself an absolute monster game, very similar to the absolute mayhem we saw on offense from Liberty last year. I think that this will easily be, or I don't want to say easily because CFF and all that, but I think this is a good chance for Salter to easily have his best game here, right? So what do you think, Justin?
Yeah, well, it's a good call, and I agree with you about sort of it is sort of a funny at this point in the season, right? If somebody had told you before the season that like both Salter and Byron Brown would be outside the top 60 or whatever of CFF QBs, I mean, you'd probably think they were crazy, right? But and it does seem kind of funny to be able to call on Salter, but yeah, he's not been very good this year, and he is outside the top 60. I think he's only far this year. Yeah, I mean, if he can't have a good game against Kennesaw State this weekend, then I don't know what to say. I mean, the only sort of downfall or way I could see it failing is if somehow Liberty scores a lot of points early, then he gets given the hook. But it should be a good matchup for Salter. Hopefully, this is a game where he can go wild. I don't know how many people who drafted him still have him. He probably is available on a
He
lot
is
of.
still 100% rostered.
Really? Okay.
That is something I
Wow.
checked beforehand. I meant to make a comment on that because I was going to say y'all can start him because I know you still have him sitting on your rosters. So
Yeah, well, I mean, kudos to all these people for having the resolve to keep him. Certainly, I would have cut him by now, but yeah, I agree with Jared. This feels like a good game. The signs point in the right direction, so let's see what happens.
the only problem with Salter, right, is like I was gonna say like if he doesn't perform this weekend, like you have to cut him. But then you look at the upcoming schedule, the CUSA schedule, man, like Jacksonville State, Middle Tennessee State, UMass, West Kentucky, Sam Houston, like this is going to be a bad abusive relationship with the people who drafted Salter because like they're going to keep looking at that schedule being like, oh, this will be the week, come on buddy, you can do it. What
Well,
about
it might almost be worse if he does really well this week because it's like you're just gonna
yeah,
keep telling yourself like, oh no, this is the real him. Of course
this
I'm
is real
keeping him. Of
him,
course
like
I'm resting.
he's back
Yeah,
baby, he's back.
exactly.
What about running backs, Justin? Who are you looking at outside the top 60 there? I like this call a lot, by the
Yeah,
way.
well, I'm coming in spicy this week, and shout out to Andrew Katz, who's in the Golden Pig, who I saw this morning made an acquisition for one Braylon Russell, Arkansas running back. When I saw that, I decided to take a look at why, and then I saw the reason. So Jaquindon Jackson probably not going to be playing this weekend. Pittman and that Arkansas staff pretty much confirmed that Braylon Russell is going to be in for a lot of carries this weekend. He's expected to carry the load for Arkansas, and they are playing Mississippi State this weekend, who are arguably the worst team in the SEC. So, you're looking at a player there who's probably going to see a lot of touches, at least if we're going to believe the staff at this point. And in a matchup where, they should be able to impose their will on Mississippi State and presumably score some points. So, Braylon Russell is a guy who I'm pretty sure is available in almost everybody's league. And if he hasn't been picked up yet and you
Not
have
if
a
you're in a
spot,
dynasty league with me. I can tell you that much right
well,
now.
Dynasty is different. Yeah, any redraft league, I assume he's probably available in 99.9% of leagues, unless you're in a league with Andrew Katz, apparently. But he should be available for most of you. And if you need a running back this week, and I assume some of you do, you might want to think about Braylon Russell, albeit that feels like a quite a bit of a risky play as well. But you'll certainly get credit for style points if this pulls off.
No, I like this call out a lot. Again, you got to take advantage of injury. And obviously, Jaquindon Jackson going down sucks. I have him in a couple of leagues, and like, trust me, I'm kind of reeling a little bit. But grabbing Braylon Russell is absolutely a play to do if you're relying on Jackson, or like you said, if you're just looking for running back help. I think he's a great call.
Mm-hmm.
He's been impressive to me this year. Again, this has really been a strong year for freshmen.
I know.
And
It's crazy.
I was kind of worried that like behind Jackson, like Russell would kind of get a little lost in the rotation with Rodney Hill, Rashad Dubinion as well. But like Dubinion's been a guy, I think he's been hurt as well. So I won't throw that out there too much. But even still, like Russell's taking advantage of the opportunity. He's the clear RB2 behind Jaquindon Jackson. I wouldn't doubt if we see him get 15 to 20 touches this upcoming weekend, right? Taylon Green's been banged up.
Yeah.
They're not going to want to do too much with him. if they think this is going to be a blowout. So, yeah, I like this call a lot, Justin. Fantastic job.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, not as much as though I like my call. No. My running back I'm throwing out there this week is Sam Scott, the running back out of Wyoming. He's going up against Utah State this weekend, and that's pretty much all you need to know here, right? He has been doing extremely well over the last couple of weeks in terms of his opportunities against North Texas. He didn't get, as much rushing opportunities, as much production as I wanted there, 11 carries, 39 yards, but he also caught the ball 3 times for 52 yards and a touchdown. So he still had himself a nice fantasy day. Against Air Force, he was able to tote the rock 19 times for 97 yards. Against San Diego State, 20 times for 94 yards. So you got like a very quiet, like volume pig-esque kind of guy here.
Yeah,
chilling in the Mountain West right now. It's just that his offense doesn't score a ton of points. So he gets a touchdown, and that's really all you can really expect out of him. Good news is he's going up against Utah State this weekend, and I'm actually shocked to learn that Wyoming's favored in this game, not by much. They're favored by about 1.5, but the over-under is 57.5. That might be the best fantasy situation that Sam Scott's going to find himself in the rest of this year, right? This is a Utah State rushing defense that is bottom 2 in the country when it comes to team performance against the rush on defense there. So I think that if he can get his 19 to 20 touches here, I think Sam Scott's in for one of his best performances of the year. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, well, and I have to return the favor here. I love the call. Big fan of Scott this week. And yeah, you mentioned at the top, the big selling point is that matchup. Quietly, Sam Scott has become sort of the lead back there for Wyoming. But as you mentioned, limiting factor here, even when he had good games the last 3 or 4 weeks, it's usually like 15, 16, 17 points because the overall offense is limited. And those are good games, but it's nothing ridiculous. But this week, you legitimately, he could maybe score 1, 2 touchdowns, and you could be looking at a 20+ point performance simply due to the fact that the matchup is so weak. So if he's going to do it, this feels like as good of a week as any to have that 20+ point bonanza. So love the call, man.
And let me see, what's his rostership percentage? Because he's honestly somebody that I feel like is pretty. Yeah, he's rostered on 2% of leagues. He's free right now. Go grab him.
Wow.
Go grab him. Justin, what about wide receivers? What wide receiver are you going with this week?
Oh, well, first of all, just let me say I'm surprised that Scott's only at 2% ownership because he's been pretty good and solid for the last couple of weeks, but that's neither here nor there. So Jacoby James is my pick at wide receiver. He plays for UMass, and quietly he's kind of become their go-to target there on offense. He's had a couple of strong performances already this year, so this is not a player I'm picking just out of the hat. But UMass as a program, and this is generally the case throughout every year, when they're in games where things are competitive, there are players like K'Ron Adams, for example, or some of these guys who've come through there. They're very good for CFF, or at least relevant for CFF. Unfortunately, usually they're in games where they're overwhelmed, and so a lot of the times their players, you have to sort of pick and choose where you're going to start them. But Jacoby James actually throughout the year has been pretty good, actually, even though he plays for UMass. And lucky for him and the Minutemen, they get to play an FCS opponent this weekend. They're one of the few FBS teams this weekend. In fact, they might be the only one who are playing a non-FBS opponent. And that team is Wagner, right? So this is a great matchup for UMass. They're in uncharted, unfamiliar territory, I should say, where they're sort of the big dog rolling into that matchup. And Jacoby James, he's sort of their clear go-to target on offense. I thought in the offseason that one of their wide receivers, namely Anthony Simpson, was going to be sort of a CFF viable asset. He was their go-to guy last year. But Jacoby James is kind of taking that role, right? And I think Simpson's in the transfer portal now. He doesn't even play for them anymore. So that's another feather in the cap for Jacoby James. So, James, I'm excited about him this weekend. I think this is a good matchup that he could take advantage of.
Another guy you can easily pick up off of waivers right now. Again, rostered on 17% of rosters right now. If you need help with the wide receiver position, I do think this is a good place to go. You got a leading guy on his team in targets. He got 47 targets. His next closest competition is Jaquan Gibson there with 34. But even so, I think if you looked over the last couple of weeks, like I think that split would be even greater. Like he's been pretty fantastic. 9, 8, 5, 9 targets over the last 4 weeks. And the other big selling point is that he's got decent volume, not like elite or anything like that, but man, is he efficient. Like outside of his game against Mizzou, where he still got 13 yards a catch, which is better than a lot, basically almost any other wide receiver on UMass can say, outside of maybe T.Y. Harding. But even the games before that, 18.7 yards per catch against Northern Illinois, 37.5 versus Miami of Ohio, 19 yards per catch versus Central Connecticut there, right? Like, he is a dude that is a big play waiting to happen. Now, again, it's UMass. You're going to have limited scoring opportunities, but I think that, this is a big play waiting to happen against an FCS opponent. I like the call here. Good job.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I don't know what to say. We're in too much agreement.
I'm in a very buttery mood today. I'm going to butter you up all day, Justin. Oh God, don't actually. Never, I should not have said that. That's going to be clipped. Mox is already on it. Like Mox is already on it.
That guy is elite with his meme usage and creating. So yeah, probably he will be.
So. Yeah, that'll definitely he'll definitely have that clip ready to go next time you and I are talking Georgia in the chat. Anyway,
wow, there's a bunch of haters in that chat. Really, I'm not even going to get started. Sorry, I'm derailing the show now.
Surprisingly, though, there are 3 Georgia fans in there, so I kind of get it. They feel outnumbered.
Who's the third?
Nick Allen.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, he's a Georgia fan. He actually coached one of the high school teams near UGA.
Oh, wow. Oh, he just never chimes in on the chat. But anyway, sorry. This is...
Oop, calling Nick out. No, I'm joking.
No, I didn't mean it in a bad way. I just mean he doesn't... I wouldn't have known, so...
Anyway, let's go to my wide receiver here that I'm starting this week. And I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly because I kind of touched on this earlier this week when I listed him as a waiver option. And I'm going to stick to it here. I'm going Darius Lassiter, wide receiver out of BYU. He's going up against UCF this week. He's been quite fantastic the last couple of weeks here. Again, 13 targets versus Baylor, 11 versus Arizona, 9 versus Oklahoma State. He is a clear number 1 option for Jake Ratzlaff and this BYU, surprisingly good BYU offense. He's scored a touchdown in 4 of his last 5 games. Maybe that comes back down to earth here soon, but he's finding a way in the end zone one way or another, and he's going up against a UCF squad that, and I touched on this earlier this week, that UCF, surprisingly, at least until this past week a little bit, they kind of dropped the ball a little bit this past week against Iowa State, but they were borderline elite versus the run, and they were horrific against the pass. I think last week they were 10th in rushing and 100th in passing defensive team performance. This week they're like 35th against the run and 87th versus the pass, but that's still a pretty wide gap there. And so I'm seeing a world here where BYU, who by the way is the underdog in this game, UCF's favored by 1.5 here. Total 55.5. BYU is going to be forced to move the ball in this game, and I just cover your ears because this is shaming poor LJ Martin here. But if LJ Martin can't get the run game going for BYU here because UCF's just that good against it, there's only one way BYU is going to be able to move the ball, and Darius Lassiter is right in line there to benefit greatly. So I think Darius Lassiter is an excellent grab off the waiver wire this week, especially if you just need a 1 play or a 1 week play at the very least. I think he'll be good beyond that, but this week in particular is just fantastic for him. Yeah, he's rostered on only 11% of leagues right now. You can go grab him in a ton of leagues right now. Justin, what do you think, man? Am I stretching too much here to make this seem bigger than it is?
No, I don't think you're stretching at all. I mean, you talk about another receiver who high volume guy, right? I mean, the targets have been there consistently throughout the season. And you mentioned it. Yeah, this is a surprising BYU team, right? Starting with the QB. Jake Ratzlaff is actually been pretty good this year. And those skill players have benefited. But when in doubt, I think when we're doing this exercise, looking for those volume players, right? So Darius Lassiter, Jacoby James, to a lesser extent, I think are generally the safe kind of plays, right? You're seeing a lot of opportunities, good things are going to typically happen. I will say there is no stopping LJ Martin. He'll get it done via the air if he has to. So maybe he'll, unfortunately for Lassiter, he might be stealing his passing touchdowns. But no, there's enough to go around. I like the call. Again, always sort of when in doubt, go for the volume. And Lassiter's a guy who, his targets are pretty strong. So.
Alrighty, we've buttered up enough of these starters here for this week. Let's talk about some guys we're going to tear down here. Some guys that have helped us out so well this year. Guys who are in the top 40 for their respective positions. But unfortunately for this week, Justin, we got some guys that need to sit down on the bench. So let's start with your quarterback here, man. You're both going for it here, but also like this guy hasn't produced well in about 3 weeks here. So I guess I don't fully blame you here, but what do you got?
Well, this is going to raise some eyebrows, undoubtedly. And I think the slate of players that I chose this week. I mean, there's a lot of big names there, right?
Your running back in particular is making me raise my eyebrows a bit.
Well, I have good reason. We'll get to that shortly. Anyways, with Jackson Dart, this is a tale of two players kind of scenario when I look at him, right? I mean, to start the year, that piss poor schedule, they beat up on the Georgia Southerns of the world. Congratulations. They start SEC play. All of a sudden, Jackson Dart's performance, I don't think he's cleared 20 points in a regular sort of format since, or at least in his last 3 games. I certainly don't trust them this week against Oklahoma. I know Oklahoma is not a good overall team, and their offense is terrible. So that probably means some short fields for Ole Miss and maybe lots of opportunities. We'll see. But Oklahoma does have a good defense. And Jackson Dart has yet to prove to me that he's capable of still having strong performances when they're not, completely overpowering some lower level team. Now, again, I know Oklahoma is one of the worst SEC teams, but still, this is one of the top programs, in terms of talent and overall level of players. So, I don't know that this one is all that spicy because Dart's not been great for 3 weeks, and certainly I don't have any shares of him, but if I did, and this is a must-win week, I certainly am not putting my trust in Dart this week.
So I totally understand a lot of it, right? Where you're right. Ever since we got to SEC play, we've taken a dive here. I've also seen Dart perform well, and like the bones are good here, right? If I'm looking at like his just raw yardage, 261, 285, 284 passing yards in the last 3 games, 22, 44, 27 rushing yards per game. Like that by itself is good most weeks. The problem is, over the last 3 weeks, he has scored 2 touchdowns. That to me says a little bit of bad touchdown luck, and I think that does regress back to the mean at some point here pretty soon. Does it come against this Oklahoma defense, though, that is, according to our numbers at C2C Winning Edge, number 8 in the country in team defensive performance, right? They're 39th versus the pass, 5th against the run, right? That on paper seems like a good opportunity for maybe a lower scoring game, which Vegas has. 48.5 is the total in this game. Problem is, I am really worried about this Oklahoma defense bottoming out here soon because you mentioned it. Their offense is horrific, and they can't stay on the field. It's legitimately one of the worst offenses in the country, and it's forcing Oklahoma to have one of the worst time of possession averages in the Power 4. That defense is going to get tired out eventually, and I think that Ole Miss is the kind of offense, and I can't remember, is this game being played at OU or is it played at Ole Miss?
Yeah, I am not sure either.
Let me look that up real quick. I should have had that written down. But regardless,
it's at Ole Miss.
Even better. So that offense is going to struggle even more in that environment, right? That defense is going to get very, very tired out here at some point, and Lane Kiffin and Jackson Dart know they need a statement win here soon, right? Like Georgia's got Texas, right? Now Texas beat up on Oklahoma as well. I think that they're going to want to put up points this weekend. I think they're going to want to have Jackson Dart to have himself a good performance again. And I think they will take advantage of a tired out Oklahoma defense here pretty soon. That's kind of my main worry here. I see a path for Dart to have himself a really nice weekend. But if Oklahoma's defense is as good as it's been in the last couple of weeks, totally understand why we're not expecting him to have a great weekend.
Yeah, well, it's like any play, right? I mean, could it go, one way? Of course, yeah. I can see the path as well, but we're choosing players top 40. Dart seems like a candidate, and even when you look last year, right? Even though he had a good year, there was lots of volatility with his performance.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say touchdowns regressing to the mean, it's like, well, I don't even know really who Jackson Dart is, So but we'll see. I mean, we'll see. But I hear what you're saying as well. And yeah, there is definitely a path there where if Lane decides to run it up and they could have a good game.
All right, we'll go with my quarterback here. I'm going with the college mutant ginger turtle himself, Billy Edwards, quarterback out of Maryland. He's going up against Minnesota this upcoming weekend. He has been really like one of like the quintessential just solid steady plays in CFF this year. He's taken a little bit of a stumble in 2 of the last 3 weeks, barely hitting 20 points versus Indiana, 18 points versus Northwestern. Had himself a nice bounce back game against USC this past week, 28 points there. The problem is, it's uber clear when Billy Edwards is going to underperform, right? And we saw that against Indiana. We saw that against Northwestern. 2 teams, by the way, that average or perform very well in our team defensive performance metrics, right? Northwestern 32nd overall in the country, Indiana 10th overall, right? And if you look at the rest of Maryland's schedule, they face teams that are much further down the list. Once he hits some of these teams, he has himself a rough game, right? Unfortunately for all of us and those of us who've been relying on Billy Edwards as a steady play each week, he's got himself another tough game this week. He's going up against Minnesota, who is currently 21st in defensive team performance, 17th versus the pass, 32nd versus the rush, right? So just tough all around, no clear glaring weakness here. Minnesota's favored in this game, and the total is very low, 45.5. So to me, this screams Edwards probably finishing in the 15 to 20 points range. If you're not satisfied with that, sorry, buddy, you got to be sitting on the bench this week. Justin, what do you think of this?
Yeah, well, there's not much for me to add there. I think you covered on the main points. I'm in agreement. This is not a great matchup for Maryland in general. Low game total, as you referenced. So yeah, I don't have much to add there. I like the idea.
Alrighty. Let's move on over to our running backs. So throw it up to you, Justin. You got the wild one here, but is it really that wild? Because again, he didn't really do great except for week 1 and this past week. Who's your running back?
Yeah. So again, prepare yourself, audience, if you're listening. Ollie Gordon is my sit this week, and yeah, you kind of touched on it. So he's not been consistently great this year. Had a great week 1, and then had a great this past week. Was banged up in that game. He did come back into the game. But I don't know where the status is of his health. I mean, he's definitely a tough kid. He's played through injuries for Oklahoma State throughout his entire career, it seems like. I mean, the usage that they were giving him last year was inevitable. He was going to get banged up. And this year, it looks like, at least coming off that BYU game, he might be dealing with something as well. I did see some smoke on social media, some OK State fans, sort of rumors swirling that maybe he's opting out for the rest of the season, something along those lines, because there was some sort of social media post of him hugging his coach and saying thank you for everything or something along those lines. Let me just say, I'm not saying I believe any of that, just sort of saying that it's out there. So I don't know. I just feel a little conflicted about Ollie Gordon this week and whether or not I'd want to put my trust again back into him. Of course, had that great game against BYU, looked like the old Ollie Gordon. He looked fantastic actually in that game. I mean, he's hurdling players, getting it done on the ground and via the air. But you know, I can't ignore as well the previous 6-5 weeks in between week 1 and this past weekend. And, I don't know, Oklahoma State's offense overall this year has been a little bit perplexing. So, I think I want to see a second game here, like Gordon put together 2 games, string it together a little bit before I really go back and invest in him as a starter. So I'm more in wait and see mode, and I don't know if I want to sort of trust him to start for me this week.
I will give you a couple of things. One, obviously, Gordon's history this year has not been what we wanted it to be. I mean, he struggled to even hit 100 yards this past week against BYU. He just happened to score 3 touchdowns, and that's what really made him look like old Ollie Gordon there. Problem is, though, like, I'm looking at this matchup versus Baylor, and like, even if I'm a little worried about like maybe he's like last week is a bit of a mirage, right? Like this last week is the first time he's averaged over 6 yards per carry. I think at all this year. Maybe I think week 1 he averaged over 6 yards. Maybe there.
No, it was 4.5 week
Okay,
1.
so yeah, last week he kind of looked a bit more like his explosive self. Most of it came off of 150-yard run, and so you're kind of thinking to yourself like, I agree. Like, is he really back or not? He's got a really good matchup here against Baylor, though. Again, over under in this game 65.5, one of the highest on the weekends. Baylor's only favored by 7 points here. And looking at their defensive numbers, right, they're below average in rushing, below average in passing. Like, yeah, Mike Gundy has his weird games every year. Like, I mean, shoot, what the heck happened against West Virginia? I have no clue. But even still, like, this on paper seems like a really good matchup for Gordon. I think a potential for him to do really well. Because if you look at some of his matchups the last couple of weeks, right, where it seemed like things were kind of like oh, doom and gloom for Ollie Gordon here. Utah, that's a tough defense. Kansas State's proved to be a very tough defense. West Virginia, I still can't explain that game fully. But then you get against BYU this past week, where we thought was a tough defense as well there, and he actually popped off in that game. So maybe he is finally healthy again. Not entirely sure. I think it's a little premature to call him an official sit. But also, like, if you're worried about off the field things that are not based on stat sheets, matchup, or anything like that, like, totally get that. So I guess that is my cue to go to my running back here, and I'm stealing a guy from you, Justin, because you had him on as your sit last week, and I'm gonna steal him. I'm gonna make him my sit this week. Braden Sloan, running back out of Ball State, going up against NIU. I love Braden Sloan, man, but like this is a tough 2-week stretch for him here in the middle of the season, right? He got Vanderbilt last week, scored 9.2 fantasy points. Like, we were kind of hoping maybe that, he could at least get some good yardage there. And through the air he did, 20 or 48 yards, 4 catches. Not too bad. That's pretty solid stuff for Sloan there, but he gets to go up against Northern Illinois this week, and boy, oh boy, like, Northern Illinois right now to me is like the kiss of death in Maction right now. Their defense is legit, just overall. Right, our numbers on C2C Winning Edge have them as the 16th best defensive performing team right now, like 15th in passing, 17th in rushing. Like, they're just overall legit. We saw it against Notre Dame. Now, granted, Notre Dame's offense was having issues back then as well, but they were able to clamp down on them, and that was the main reason why they're able to pull off that upset. And Vegas is seeing what we're seeing here too. Again, they think NIU's defense is legit. They got an over-under in this game of 48.5. They got NIU favored by 11. We've seen that when Ball State's, not in a competitive game, not an expected high-scoring game, things fall apart for them extremely quickly for both them and Sloan. And Sloan's games are easy to point out here, right? When JMU came to town, or excuse me, when they went to JMU, they got destroyed. Sloan had a bad day. When they went to Vanderbilt, they were outmatched. Sloan had a bad day. I think the same thing happens here again with Sloan this weekend. If I have Sloan in my lineups, I'm looking for other options.
Yeah, I like this pick because I fear there's a portion of the community out there that might get lulled into thinking, well, this is a Maction game. Let's cue Sloan right back up. We had to sit him last week against Vandy. We're back into conference play. But as you pointed out, NIU defense, probably the best in the MAC, and overall probably just a very good defense. At least they have been so far. So yeah, I mean, I like the call out. I mean, I hope he does well this weekend. I have a few shares of his, but I'm in agreement, and I'm not expecting too much. Although he had a decent performance last week when I said to sit him against Vandy. Nothing amazing, but he was okay.
And his 9.6 points ain't exactly too much to write home about.
No. If you sat him, you're happy you sat him. So, and I would expect probably something similar this week. NIU again is a tough defense, although it is Maction, but I don't know. There's probably better options for those out there if you need a running back.
All righty. What about your wide receiver, Justin? Which wide receiver are you sitting this week?
Yeah, so Magdalena, Fresno State, and this is kind of in theme with Jackson Dart, or just similar sort of reasoning, in that Delena's kind of lost steam over the last few weeks. It's not nothing really about specific conference play versus not. It's just that he kind of started the season off hot. Lately, he's been kind of he's not been as productive. And Fresno State in general, just their wide receivers, or just the way they've been doing things. At least last year, it was like different wide receivers throughout different points of the season were the go-to guys. And that seems like maybe something similar is at play here, where it's like Delano was kind of the hot hand early on. Now he still sees decent levels of targets, but performance definitely has dipped recently. And so that's primarily why I'm sitting him. There's nothing too complicated there. I'm just sort of looking at his sort of regression as the season goes on, and I'd like to see him have a nice performance again before I sort of cue him up in the starting position.
Yeah, if you look at his performances over the last couple of weeks, I mean, really outside of maybe the UNLV game where you got 7 targets, 4 catches, 70 yards, and 22 and touchdowns. Excuse me, there. Overall, like again, very disappointing, right? You're looking at 6.3 fantasy points, 8.1, 6.5, right? Like you don't trust Delana at this point. If you had him starting earlier this year, and a good reason why probably I was not able to sell him in my dynasty league, even though I was trying my hardest. And this matchup versus San Jose State here, right, does not really scream an opportunity for him to outperform what he has been doing. If he does, I think it's a point where you just kind of get lucky, right? Because San Jose State, their defensive numbers are very average overall. Like they're 52nd overall in defensive team performance, 71st versus the pass, 65th, right in the middle of the country when it comes to the rush, right? Nothing that really says like, oh, this will be a much better defense for Delana to perform against. The Vegas numbers aren't really screaming anything here. Again, 4.5 favor Fresno is, and then 55.5, which is, not a horrific total or anything like that, but it's not one that really screams like, okay, Delana's going to have multiple opportunities here for touchdowns, right? At least no better opportunities than, Raylan Sharp or Jalen Moss or Elijah Gillum's probably going to have the most opportunities on this team here. So especially Mikey Keene's been struggling quite a bit recently. Like, good Lord, how many interceptions does that man have? Because I feel like I see it like he's got 9 interceptions to 8 touchdowns.
Tough. Well, I was on the one of the Fresno State message boards the other day, and their fans are clamoring to get in Jaden Mandel, I think his name is, like the young guy who's behind Keene, because Keene's been abysmal this year, to put it frankly.
Yeah. So I like to call on Delana again. Like if you're sitting there like kind of deciding like maybe do I start him again this week? Like maybe he finally gets back to form. No, I think you keep him on the bench. So. I almost skipped over my guy. I'm cheating here a little bit, but we can have guys with multiple eligibility
when I saw
positions.
This, I was like, what is Jared doing here? Come on.
No, I know exactly what I'm doing here, Justin. I am playing this just like we would play it in fantasy. I'm going with a guy with dual wide receiver and RB eligibility here, who absolutely plays running back, because I did not want to pick any of the wide receivers. I'll be real. I was not really finding any guys that really screamed sit to me. But Brashard Smith, the running back / wide receiver, at least according to Fantrax out of SMU, is a clear sit option for me this week. Dude was phenomenal to start the year, right? Like, I should have written this down, but let's see. Running backs. Brashard Smith, where are you, son of a gun? There you go. Yeah, he started off the year. He's currently RB 30 on the year in total points, but this dude got up to as high as RB 6 in fantasy points per game, and then in total points, right? Like he was as high as RB 10. Right, he was a phenomenal start, a pleasant surprise, but last couple of weeks, man, it feels like the usage is just not there anymore. I don't know if SMU is shifting strategy here with their running backs, but we had definitely seen a drop down in his volume, right? Again, has 17, 18 carries versus Florida State, TCU, right? Over 100 yards in those games. But then Louisville came around, 13 carries, 52 yards, so a bit of a drop there, but not the end of the world, right? Well, the end of the world came the next week against Stanford, right? 8 carries, 67 yards there, and a clear split in the backfield. Now, you can say, like, well, SMU won that game 40-10, right? Like, they were blowing them out. that still doesn't ignore the fact that he got a pretty significantly less chunk of volume against Louisville. To me, it seems like that they are moving away from him being a clear, like kind of not a workhorse because he wasn't that level, but like the clear main guy. Against Stanford, right? You got Roderick Daniels coming in for 10 carries. LJ Johnson coming in for more carries than Brashard Smith, and he got the 2 touchdown opportunities there. And then on top of all of that, right, like he has decreasing usage the last couple of weeks, but also this is just a tough matchup in general. Duke's defense is legit, right? They got some weakness against the run, which should help Brashard Smith out. Again, they're 63rd against the run in team defensive performance, but even still, this is a low-scoring game, at least according to Vegas. Like 48.5 is the total here. SMU's favored by 11.5. So some opportunities to score here, but again, like I said, it's clear that like Smith's not a monopolizing threat for touchdowns like he was kind of earlier this year at this point. So I'm sitting Brashard Smith in leagues that I have him in. What about you, Justin?
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement, and it's the declining touch usage or usage in the offense that's the most troubling for me. Again, not that he was ever like a 20 carry type of guy, but the fact that he was out carried by, yeah, Roderick Daniels in this recent game, it's a little bit strange. So yeah, I don't know that I really want to be trusting Smith this week. I'm not totally out on him like for the whole season, but at the current moment, I'm with you and sort of in agreement with what you said. This is not really the week that I'd even want to start him, even if he was still doing okay. I mean, Duke is they've been a very good defense so far. So tough matchup and declining usage. It's not a great formula. So yeah, I'm in agreement.
Yeah, I'm looking at my rest of season rankings right now, and they currently have Brashard Smith at RB 39, both in total points and in fantasy points per game. So that's even lower than where he's at right now. So I guess that's a little bit of a warning for people. Like SMU's schedule, they're hitting the toughest stretch here over the next couple of weeks, and that's going to kind of spell a little bit of trouble for you, at least compared to other running back options out there. So with that being said, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Because I got yelled at for saying "with that being said" over and over again on this week's earlier episode, so I gotta get that out of my vocabulary.
Why? It's a good transitionary like phrase.
It's a good transitionary phrase until you say it about 17,000 times in the same episode.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Let's move on over to our fan submitted start sit questions. Again, appreciate all of you guys out there that are submitting these questions each week. We got a good mix of you guys out there, and we got a good mix of you guys leaving them in the YouTube comments now. So again, I'm trying to get those involved every single week. If you want to get yours answered on the show, like I just mentioned, you can leave your questions on the waiver wire shows every week in the comments of YouTube. But also, if probably the best way to do it is to follow the @ChasingTheNatty account. Turn on notifications for it, because usually Monday around lunchtime, I will put out a tweet asking for your start sit questions, and I make sure that I try to get as many of those on here as possible. We go with 5 each week, the best ones that I think are worth discussing. So let us move on over. I almost said it again. Let's move on over to our first question of the day here. This one comes to us from the YouTube comment section at SavageQK5FD. Shout out to him. I know he's been leaving questions the last couple of weeks. Wanted to make sure I got him on this week. He is asking us to pick between 2 quarterbacks here. One is Mr. Malik Williams, quarterback out of UNLV, going up against Boise State. Or we can go with Mr. Gio Lopez, quarterback out of South Alabama, going up against UL Monroe. Justin, I'll throw it over to you first, man. Which of these quarterbacks are you going to go with?
Well, I mean, they're both solid options. I would say Malik Williams is going to be my pick. He's just been so good since he's taken over that starting role. I mean, he hasn't had a bad game yet. This game, we touched on it earlier, so I'm not going to rehash all of that. But Jared mentioned it. I mean, this is going to be potentially a very high-scoring game. Friday night lights, that's always exciting. I always feel like that's a good night for CFF Magic as well. And UNLV is going to have to keep up pace with Ashton Genty and Boise State scoring, right? I mean, I think Genty's going to get his. I hope not, as I mentioned earlier, but I think he is. And Malik Williams and that offense, it goes through the pass. And Malik Williams is going to have his foot on the gas all night. And he, like I said, he hasn't had a bad game yet since he took over that starting position. So, I love the matchup. I think the player, he's been very consistent so far. I don't want to get too cute with this one, and so I'm just going to sort of follow that line of logic.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with Haj Malik Williams here as well. Not to agree with you here, Justin, but I got
It's
to when
okay.
it's when it to me it. I don't want to say it's pretty obvious because I can understand why somebody might want to go up against or go with Gio Lopez here, but I think you also have to be careful of helmet scouting here, right? We think of UL Monroe, we think of like, oh, doormat team, just hang 40 on them, call it a day. That's not who UL Monroe's been this week. Again, we kind of give Brian Vincent a lot of credit as a head coach for kind of the offense he's able to create with UL Monroe this week. We love Ahmad Hardy, obviously, but that's actually not where the bread and butter has been made with this team. They've been really solid on defense, especially against the pass. Now, Lopez obviously has his dual threat ability, and UL Monroe is susceptible versus the run here. They're 84th in defensive rushing team performance here, so I think that there's still a path for Lopez to have himself a good day, but when you actually break down, like, is this defense one that South Alabama can really take advantage of, like they have in previous weeks? I don't think it's quite that obvious. Versus UNLV's going up against Boise State. There's a reason why this over/under in this game is 66.5. Right? Both teams are going to be expected to score in this game, and I think Haj Malik Williams is going to be able to take advantage of that. And when I look at my projections, when I look at C2C's projections here, both of them have Haj Malik Williams as at least 10 more fantasy points than Gio Lopez going into this weekend. And so I gotta agree with the projections here. If we're wrong about this, everybody's wrong about this. So that is my thought process on it. I basically said the same thing as you, Justin. Anything else you want to add?
No, look, it's sometimes it's the same talking points, right? You feel like, okay, well, just rehashing the same points. It's all good though. I mean, again, I wouldn't say, yeah, it is a pretty clear choice for me as well.
So, all right, let's move on to our next question here. This one comes to us from Michael Erickson at merickson2512 on Twitter. He is asking us to choose one quarterback in a 6-point passing touchdown league here between Blake Horvath, who's going up against Notre Dame this week, Will Howard, who's going up against Nebraska, or we can go with Brendan Sorsby, the quarterback out of Cincinnati, going up against Colorado. So, Justin, I feel like being nice to you today. I'm going to throw it over to you again, man.
Well, I do appreciate that. So, yeah, let's look at all three of these QBs. So, Blake Horvath, I'm a huge fan. Really love what Navy's doing this year, but they have a tough matchup against Notre Dame. Don't really know what they're going to do when faced with the level of opponent like Notre Dame. Navy, again, I love what they've been doing this year, but their schedule is pretty putrid. And Horvath has been a benefactor of that. So in this game, I'm not quite sure what to expect. Will Howard and Sorsby is where it gets a little bit more interesting for me. So with Will Howard versus Nebraska, prior to like last week, I probably would have said, this matchup doesn't feel amazing because Nebraska has a good defense. That's what I was thinking at least. But after seeing Indiana sort of just tear them apart, at will, both quarterbacks, Curtis Rourke goes out, David Jackson comes in, no problem, things keep rolling. Now I don't know that matchup's really all that bad. And then with Sorsby, again, he's another one who he's been pretty. I like what him and Cincinnati have been doing earlier this year. He's kind of volatile though. Like he'll have a good game, then a couple of bad games. He seems to be highly dependent on the matchup, and even then, in some of those good matchups, he didn't have a fantastic game. Colorado, Cincinnati though feels like quite a good game for lots of points. We know Colorado wants to sort of pass and move quickly on offense. The offense for Cincinnati definitely goes through Sorsby. He is a dual threat QB, getting it done in the air and on the ground. So let me just sort of cut to the chase. Horvath, I'm cutting out. There's too much uncertainty for me with that matchup. Regarding the other two, it's not quite. There's not a clear winner for me. I'd probably have a hard time going. I'd probably change my mind multiple times throughout the week if I was making this decision. Howard feels like a safer floor player. So depending on what you want, if you're shooting for upside, I think Sorsby's the play. If you're shooting more for something safe, Howard to me would be the play. So now I have to choose a player. I'm gonna pick Sorsby. I'm a high upside guy, but I think the person who asked this question, it really depends on what it is you're looking for this week, and then choose accordingly.
Yeah, I agree with you that Horvath is the clear sit here, which feels wrong, but I don't think people realize, like, again, I get it. We all love what Navy's doing this year, right? Like, we all are rooting for them this weekend, but I really think that they're going to get not killed by Notre Dame, right? But like, this is a really tough matchup compared to what Navy's really faced so far. To give everybody an idea, right? When I look at my projections, every team that, like, every matchup is given a score, kind of indicating like how hard that matchup is compared to the average team that a certain team faces throughout their schedule, right? So 0 would be like completely average team. Like, this is right in line with what you normally face. You go positive, you're looking at an easier game. You go negative, you're looking at a harder game. This past week with Navy, they face a pretty easy opponent, and that score that was given to that team was a .62. I'm talking numbers here, so bear with me here. But just to give you an idea, that game was a .62 in terms of how easy it was compared to the normal schedule. Notre Dame is a negative 2.26. So you're talking about over 4 times as difficult as compared to what they're normally looking at. It is a tough matchup. And like, I didn't want to believe it at first when I first saw my projections, because my projections have Horvath at 13.6 this week. C2C's projections have him at 13.29. I didn't believe that at first because I'm like, there's got to be something wrong here. I went and checked my stuff, and that is just legitimately how much harder this matchup is for Horvath this week. I think, honestly, I should have put Horvath as my sit for quarterback because, like, it is a really, really tough matchup now that I'm really thinking about it. That's a long-winded way of saying, like, Horvath's a clear sit for me out of these two, which is, again, weird because of how good he's been. But between Howard and Sorsby, I'm actually going to go with Howard here. I think that if you're going to ask me who do I trust to pass for 3+ touchdowns this upcoming weekend, I'm going to go with Will Howard. I think that Ohio State is just the kind of offense that can take care of that. If I'm looking at this upcoming game, we are looking at a Vegas over-under of, let me find them, good Lord. There we go. Okay, not a super high-scoring game, 48.5, but Ohio State's favored by 25.5 here, right? This is expected to be a very lopsided game. I think they can potentially cover that here against Nebraska. If they're not covering that, I think it's because Nebraska is better on offense than we were expecting coming into this game. Not that Ohio State was struggling on offense. I expect 3 passing touchdowns from Will Howard this weekend. I'm not sure I can fully believe that Brendan Sorsby is going to be able to get that done. So I'm going to go with Will Howard. I'll give you Brendan Sorsby. Any thoughts you might have on that?
No. I mean, I think you did a good job summarizing sort of the other side of it. Again, as I sort of mentioned, I think Howard is the safer floor player. Sorsby to me though has a higher upside. I think he's a little bit more of a dual threat. That being said, though, Howard has like 6 straight games of 1 rushing touchdown. It's been pretty consistent. So, yeah, we'll see what happens.
Alrighty, let me put our tokens back here. Oh, I should probably mention, like, our C2C projections and my projections both favor Will Howard here. So I'm in line with projections. Sorsby in my projections only behind him by about 2 points. C2C projections has a little bit wider of a gap. They have Will Howard about 31 and Sorsby at 25. So both good options, right? Like, neither of those guys are really screaming like, oh, you should not start this guy. Horvath definitely both way behind both of those guys, at least with our projections. So believe them or not, I think it's worth believing. Let's move on to our next question here. This one comes to us from Mr. Brandon Champion at Brandon the Champ on Twitter. Good friend of the show, longtime friend of the show. In a full PPR league, he's asking us to pick between two running backs here. Either Mr. Tawi Walker, running back out of Wisconsin, going up against Penn State this weekend, or we can go with Star Thomas, the running back out of Duke, going up against SMU. So, Justin, throwing it over to you first, man. Which one are you going with?
Yeah, I don't know. Like neither sort of stand out as great plays to me. Star Thomas had a nice stretch there. At least the 3 game stretch there, sort of in September. Part of that was the competition that they were playing. His last 2 weeks, although the volume has actually still been there. He had 18 touches a couple of weeks ago against Georgia Tech, 21 touches last week against Florida State. He actually scored a touchdown, almost got 100 yards, which is not a bad game. He finished with around 14, basically 15 points. Not a terrible outing by any means. But certainly, he hasn't quite been as prolific last couple of weeks. And then Tyree Walker, I think the big thing here, and probably why this person is asking this question, is obviously he's the designated workhorse there. He's been good, but this is a tough matchup with Penn State, right? So now with Penn State, it's always like, and I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that their defense is good, but it always every season at this point of the year, I'm always sort of left questioning of like, okay, I know their numbers look good, but I don't really know how good they actually are. I mean, they played USC. Okay, I mean, I don't even know if that's a great win. They're not ranked anymore, but USC, that's a Lincoln Riley offense, albeit they're not even that great this year. But I guess my point being, Penn State, it's hard to even know sort of how good they are. Their numbers suggest they're quite good defensively, though. So we should take that data point into account. But the same actually can be said about Star Thomas. SMU has a good defense as well. They're playing really good ball. I think we all had a bad first impression of them early on in the year when they almost dropped the game to Nevada. But I mean, they're sitting there with 1 loss. They've been looking really good recently. So in both cases, this is not a great matchup. I think I'm going to roll with Tawi Walker, which may be shocking. I don't know. Because I mean, Walker had a okay performance last weekend, if I remember correctly, against Northwestern. He's definitely their go-to guy in the backfield. And this is a sort of a classic Big Ten matchup. There's going to be a lot of running of the football in this one. It's Wisconsin. I know they're a little different on offense with Longo now, but they still like to run the ball, as evidenced by the fact of, look at Walker's usage, particularly after Malusi went down. So in both cases, there's a running back who's the designated pick for their team. Bad matchup. I'm kind of splitting hairs here. Walker has been better recently than Star Thomas, who's kind of had a more down couple of weeks. But I am splitting hairs here. I will say that when I choose Walker.
I thought this was going to be tougher for me at first because I see that Penn State matchup. I don't love it. It's part of the reason why I was a little hesitant with Walker to even begin with, because I obviously love the volume, but man, this stretch he has going on right now in the Big Ten is a little brutal. I'm not going to lie. I don't think you're really expecting him to get anywhere near the performance that he got against Purdue, right? But here's the thing. My projections don't love Tawi Walker this week. They got him at 11.5 fantasy points here. C2C's got him up upwards of 19, but I think mine take into account a bit more of the matchup here. My projections hate this matchup with Star Thomas and SMU. They got him down to 4.5 fantasy points projected for this weekend. Now, again, I'm not taking that as gospel, right? That seems pretty crazy low, but regardless, like you said, this SMU defense has been surprisingly very stout this year. Again, they're third in the country in terms of rushing defensive team performance, right? That's a tough matchup. Star Thomas, man, he got the volume early this year, but like you said, he's not their star running back despite his name, right? I think that has a bigger chance of bottoming out there against SMU than Tawi Walker. I'm not expecting much, right? Again, my projections got him as 11.5. I'm not expecting much if I do start Tawi this week, but I think you still got to chase the volume here, right? He's had 19, 24, 23 carries the last couple of weeks, right? Even against the Penn State defense that I think is really, really solid, he's still going to be able to at least get something going here, right? So I'm going to trust it. I thought Tolly wouldn't do that great this past week against a Northwestern defense. He didn't find the end zone, but he still got 126 yards. And that was supposed to be a tougher matchup for him, so I'll roll with him again this week over Mr. Star Thomas. So we'll go ahead and put those tokens up there and immediately put them back because, why do this in a way that makes any kind of sense? All right, we got 2 more questions to get through here. Let's hop on over to our next one here. This one comes to us from Andre at _is_Andre_ on Twitter. He's asking us to pick between 3 wide receivers here, between Ja'Cory Brooks going up against Boston College, or we can go with Xavier Restrepo, wide receiver out of Miami, going up against Florida State, or we can go Jamal Pritchett, the wide receiver out of South Alabama, going up against UL Monroe. It is start 2. I did not see that until now. I'll be real, that makes this a little bit easier of a question just in my mind. But Justin, I'll throw it over to you. Maybe you surprise me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd love to surprise. I don't know that I will. Ja'Cory Brooks for me, definitely starter. He's been very good this year. He's Jeff Brom's wide receiver 1. There's nothing really about Boston College in particular that screams to me that this is some, week where you have to sit him. So Brooks, I'm locking in. Restrepo has also been fantastic this year, and this is a rivalry game. And, this is a game where I think Miami is going to want to put on a show. This is a team, these are 2 programs where they're competing in recruiting a lot. They're rivals, as I mentioned as well, in-state rivals. And blood is in the water there for Miami, where they can really sort of embarrass, their Seminole rivals this year. FSU, not a very good team this year. I suppose my only concern is that if it's such a blowout that Restrepo would get pulled. I don't see that happening. I don't think, I don't even know if Miami's going to want to pull their starters. They might just want to keep pounding.
Absolutely not. They got a Heisman to chase.
Yeah, and obviously they're in the playoff hunt too, of a terrible schedule. So every point matters, every blowout matters. So
I'm gonna start taking a shot every time you take a shot at their schedule.
Well, no, I don't mean it to take it like a shot. I just mean it as like it's just a matter. It's just a fact, right? So Jamal Pritchett's another. He's good. He's been a good player this year, and we touched on this game briefly earlier with Gio Lopez. I wouldn't be upset to start Pritchett, let me say. But for me, Brooks and Restrepo, they've both been very good this year. I like their matchups. These are all 3 good players that I think for starting this week. There's not one that stands out to me as a clear sit. But if I'm choosing, I think I'm going to roll with Restrepo as my second starter. I think this is a great game for him for the reasons I mentioned earlier. He's so involved in that offense. And I think Miami wants to score a lot of points this weekend versus a very weak FSU team. So, yeah, those are the 2 I'm rolling with.
Yeah, to me, there's a clear sit between these 3, and it is Jamal Pritchett. Not only because our projections agree with me, right? And I'll be real, like the C2C projections don't have him that far behind. I think they have him about a point less than Ja'Cory Brooks. Actually, I'm actually kind of surprised that our C2C projections of Ja'Cory Brooks here with 15.49. They got Restrepo at 17.71 for those wondering. But even still, they have Brooks and Restrepo as your top 2. My projections have a much bigger gap between Brooks and Restrepo versus Pritchett. My projections have both Brooks and Restrepo in the 17 to 18 point range, and then Jamal Brooks all the way down at 10.8 fantasy points. And I don't fully blame my projections. I don't fully blame my lean in this. Like, I am absolutely starting Ja'Cory Brooks. Like you said, he's been an absolute stud. I'm starting with Restrepo. He's been a stud as well. Jamal Pritchett is the standout here because, one, he's been a little inconsistent the last couple of weeks. Now, granted, it has been a little bit matchup based, right? Against LSU, 3 catches, 40 yards. But whatever, right? That's at LSU. You can kind of throw that one in the trash. At Arkansas State, bounces back. 12 targets, 137 yards, 2 touchdowns. You're like, all right, baby, here we go. Then against Troy, 4 targets, 3 catches, 42 yards, nothing else. That is a little concerning, but it's also pretty clear that, defensive matchup can impact Pritchett pretty well here. And unfortunately, we kind of touched on it earlier when we talked about Gio Lopez. This UL Monroe matchup is a little bit more difficult than people are kind of giving it credit for. Again, Vegas is telling us this is expected to be a pretty low-scoring game. USA favored by 7 points, but over-under is 45.5. So you're not really expecting, points galore here. And we saw last week against Troy, right? If South Alabama is not getting points galore, Bridget has a chance of really bottoming out versus I think Restrepo and Brooks are both in matchups this upcoming weekend that can really provide them plenty of opportunities. So I think it's a pretty clear choice with Restrepo and Brooks. Moving it on back, and we'll move to our final question, a flex question. We love flex questions around here. This one comes to us from Jack C on Twitter at JackCT or at JackCDCTT. Jack, get a few less letters in your name there, buddy. No, I'm kidding, man. He's asking us to pick between 2 wide receivers and a running back here, and I believe a full point PPR league. So he is asking between Xavier Restrepo, the wide receiver out of Cincinnati, going up against Colorado, or we can go Jordan James, the running back out of Oregon, going up against Illinois this week, or we can go with Trebor Pena, the wide receiver out of Syracuse, going up against Pitt this weekend. So Justin, I'll throw it over to you first, man. Which one are you going to go with? Or which one?
Yeah, just pick one, at least on the show sheet. So yeah, Pena, as far as I know, when I was looking at the latest update prior to the show, is questionable for this weekend. Or at least he's labeled as day to day. So, initially my thought is probably he's the first one to cut out of this. I mean, even if he plays, is he fully healthy? You won't know, really. I mean, even if you get that update, Saturday morning on Fantrax, the Pena's in, we're not really going to know, like, okay, is he really full go or not? So that kind of makes him an easy one to isolate early on. Between the other two, for these flex position questions, typically when I'm choosing between the two positions, running back and wide receiver, even if it's PPR, I do tend to favor the running back. Running back, you're going to see typically, if he's the bell cow of his team, typically, 20 touches is not out of the realm of possibility, whereas top wide receiver, which Henderson is definitely the top wide receiver for Cincinnati. Probably an amazing game would probably be somewhere around 10 to 15 targets. Now, granted, touches for running back versus wide receiver are not exactly the same. But I look at Oregon, I look at their skill players, in particular, Jordan James, even Dylan Gabriel, both had their best games of the season against probably their toughest opponent in Ohio State a couple weekends ago. And the reason I mention that is, Illinois typically is a strong defense under Brett Bielema, and they're solid this year. But, I look at sort of James's performance against Ohio State weeks ago. It was good. It was pretty on par for his performances for the rest of the season, really. And I don't know that I really trust Illinois is going to be stopping Oregon this weekend. And James has been just very consistent throughout the year. I like Henderson. I wouldn't be upset of starting him either. I mentioned with the Swordsby section that, this is a game that feels good for CFF purposes. Both offenses want to move the ball quickly. But, it's a top wide receiver on that team versus a top running back here for his team. And, I don't know that I really think that this is a matchup where James is going to just be bottled up. I think he's going to see those 20 touches and easily he could get 100 yards, a score or two in this game, where it feels a little bit more risky to bet on Henderson getting 100 yards and a couple scores. So I'm going to choose James here for this flex question. Again, would not be upset with starting Henderson, but I think James feels safer to me. So
the more and more I think about this question, the more and more I think you're 100% right, and I actually don't even think that it's that close. Henderson, like you said, he's behaved like a top wide receiver in terms of his volume some games, but he's also had some really bottom out weeks, right? Against Cincinnati, only 2 targets. Against Houston, only 2 targets. Otherwise, he's had 10 plus targets. But even still, this past week against Arizona State, right? 10 targets, 8 catches, 67 yards, and no touchdowns, right? Definitely not behaving like a top end wide receiver, at least in terms of that, right? He's getting all these targets, but he's only got 4 touchdowns on the year so far, and he's played in 7 games, right? So this is not a guy that you can really rely on week to week versus Jordan James, man. I'm happy to see him perform well. He's clearly the top back for Oregon right now. And then you kind of mentioned it already, when you see this matchup between Oregon and Illinois, right, you're sitting there thinking like, oh, low scoring game, right, defensive matchup. Illinois' got a big weakness, and that is their rushing defense. They're 106th in the country in defensive team performance, right? I will never, ever get this stat right, ever. Defensive rushing team performance. They're 106th in that. They're bottom 30 in the country. They are struggling to stop the run, and that is a huge benefit to Jordan James here. I think he'll be phenomenal. Henderson, I like the matchup with Colorado, but as I mentioned before, Colorado's defense is better than people are kind of giving them credit for this year. So I think it's a bit tougher of a matchup than we're really looking at there. My projections agree. They actually have Henderson the lowest of the three here. Obviously, our projections don't really take into account injury, right? But Henderson's got 11.8. Jordan James got 20.4 in my projections here. And then Jabor Pena, man, if he was healthy, he would be giving Jordan James a run for his money right now because, again, that is a solid matchup versus Pitt, high scoring there. But like you said, Justin, even if he plays, right, there's no guarantees 100%. There's no guarantee that he's not just a decoy out there. They have other options in that passing attack, right, that they can let Pena rest a little bit, play half his snaps, and then call it a day, right? Jordan James will be involved. Jordan James is the key mismatch for Oregon in this game. I think he's in for a good day. So I'm going with Jordan James for you here, Jack. So put those back. And if I do believe so, yes, that is indeed the final question. And we are at the end of our show. Appreciate all of you guys out there for listening. If you have not already, leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. If you're on the YouTube side of things, if you're on the podcast side of things, make sure you follow the show, leave a 5-star review wherever you can. Make sure you guys check out the rest of the Campus to Canton podcast networks for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. Justin, before we get out of here, do you want to say anything to the kind folks out there in the CFF world?
No, not too many words this week. If you're not, you should be subscribed to Campus to Canton. Obviously, subscribe to Jared's show. Follow, all these guys, Nate and Kay and Jared, all these guys from C2C on Twitter. If you don't already, please follow me. Well, if you want to, at Volume Pigs on Twitter. I do have a newsletter chatting about similar topics that me and Jared discussed this week. It's all CFF related stuff as well. So feel free to give that a look if you're interested.
Yeah, absolutely. Go check out Justin's stuff. It is well worth the price of admission. Until then, we'll see you guys back here on Monday for another round of waiver wires as we get prepared for playoff runs. Until then, appreciate all of you guys, and I hope you guys have a wonderful and blessed week. See y'all.